Trump goes silent as Jasmine Crockett unleashes devastating receipts live in Congress. He sat still. That in itself was the shock. Donald J. Trump, man of endless noise, master of outrage chaos. Conductor-in-chief was dead silent. In hearing room 3, under the sterile lights and unforgiving cameras of Congress, he didn't bark, didn't tweet, didn't even smirk. He just sat there, frozen, like the ghost of a presidency that refused to admit it had already died. And across from him stood the woman who made that happen. No grand introduction, no chest-beating slogans. Just Jasmine Crockett, sleeves rolled, spine straight, folder in hand, like a scalpel. What followed wasn't a hearing, it was a political exorcism. A reckoning with all the lies, all the loyalists, all the golden toilets and Fox News segments that had replaced actual governance in America. But let's rewind. Because what happened that day didn't start with silence, it started with a trap. Trump had called for this hearing. He thought it would be his show, his production. One more arena where he could rewrite history, toss around blame, and remind his enemies that he still owned the spotlight. He stacked the room with his avatars of influence: Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, who never met a camera or an executive order she didn't like. Elon Musk, casually draped in tech bro invincibility sunglasses on indoors, like Congress was Coachella. And Kash Patel, seated like a frat boy who just cheated his way into the FBI director's chair. It was supposed to be a spectacle. It became a slaughter. When Crockett took the stand, no one applauded. No one needed to. The air changed. The cameras adjusted. Something was coming. She opened with a whisper, not a war cry. Donald Trump is the weakest man ever to step onto the American political stage. No gasps, no jeers, just the thud of those words dropping like a gavel made of granite. Trump's eyebrows twitched. Bondi blinked. Elon didn't move, but his hand crept toward the base of his mic. They weren't ready. No one was. Crockett scanned the room with surgical precision. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It sliced. He raises his voice when fear takes over. He threatens to mask his insecurity. And he picks his targets based on how loudly they disturb the silence in his head. She wasn't talking about politics anymore. She was talking about pathology. Trump didn't flinch, but his mouth shifted in an attempt at a smirk that landed like a flinch dressed as defiance. He didn't know it yet, but the hearing he orchestrated to humiliate Jasmine Crockett had become the courtroom of his own unmasking. I sit near the top of that list, she said. Top 3 easily. Because I never bowed. Because I named the coward while he built his empire on intimidation and gold-plated toilets. Still no applause, just silence. The heavy kind, the kind that sticks. She turned slightly, almost offhandedly, toward the camera. Not for drama, just clarity. In my hands, every fact they tried to bury today. And I'm the one flipping the switch. And with that, the lights behind her flickered and a clip rolled. Fox News. Pam Bondi on air calling her the Barbie at the DOJ. Calling for action. Calling her dangerous. Calling for protection for Elon Musk because Jasmine dared to question the tech monarch on her birthday. She said it herself. Bondi had snapped in the clip. Let's take him out on my birthday. And then she backpedals. It was brutal, brazen, political theater packaged as national security. Back in the hearing room, Bondi didn't blink. Elon crossed his arms tighter. Trump leaned forward, cocky. Anne Crockett. She turned to Bondi and spoke with a precision that could shave steel. Is that the voice of law? Or the tone of a political mafia? Bondi tried. She really did. She summoned her inner prosecutor and leaned in with a tight smile. Let me be clear. I don't deal in metaphors. I deal in facts. Wrong move. Crockett snapped back. Facts. Then let's talk facts. You said I called for violence. I said it in front of reporters. You whispered yours through cable networks with your outrage rehearsed and your hair curled. Bondi stiffened. You're not a justice official. You're a press release in heels. Gasps. Not polite ones. The kind that happen when decorum gets slapped across the face with the truth. Trump tried to break the tension with a snide interjection. You're not a legislator, Jasmine. You're an instigator. A soundbite in heels. Wrong. Move. Again. Crockett didn't even blink. I may be an instigator, she said coolly, but I didn't send a mob in Gucci belts to storm the Capitol while I watched from a golf cart. This wasn't a hearing. It was a literary execution. You call me a soundbite, she continued. You built your entire career on all caps lies and golf course indictments. I deal in facts. You deal in merch. Trump opened his mouth. No words came out. It was at that moment the room knew the trap had backfired. The man who came to humiliate had been stripped down, not with yelling, not with theatrics, but with quiet surgical devastation. Crockett straightened her papers. "You don't scare me, Mr. Trump. You don't silence me. And you sure as hell don't own this room." She paused. "This isn't Trump Tower. This is the United States Congress. And the only name engraved in power here is we, the people." There was no applause. That's not how truth lands. It settles in, it roots, and it waits. And for the first time in the entire hearing, Trump sat back, silent, small, powerless. And Jasmine Crockett leaned in like a teacher at the front of the classroom, voice cool as carved granite. "If you still don't get it, Mr. Trump, I'll gladly teach you the Constitution." Line by line, he said nothing, because sometimes justice doesn't scream. Sometimes it just stands up and speaks. And when it does, even the loudest man in America goes quiet. He said nothing. And for the first time in that marble-lined cage of power, his silence spoke louder than any of his tweets ever had. But silence wasn't surrender, not yet. Because behind that stillness, behind the furrowed brow, the crossed arms, the smirk that twitched but didn't rise, the empire was still seated, still watching, still dangerous. Jasmine Crockett knew that. That's why she didn't gloat. She didn't declare victory. Because this wasn't about humiliating a man. It was about exposing a machine built on fear, loyalty, and unchecked power, not policy, not service, not democracy. And that machine wasn't just Donald Trump. It was the network he assembled piece by piece, roll by roll, until the lines between law and loyalty blurred into something far more dangerous. They called it government, but it ran like a cartel. Pam Bondi, Elon Musk, Kash Patel. These weren't witnesses. They were monuments to a new kind of American rule, the power über alles doctrine, where laws were suggestions and accountability was optional, so long as you stood behind the right man. Let's start with Bondi. Once a respected prosecutor, now the Attorney General under Trump's second administration, her job wasn't to uphold justice. It was to shield her king. On screen, she played the enforcer. But in Congress, she wore silence like a designer coat, tailored, expensive, and utterly void of warmth. Her entire presence screamed calculation. Her only movement, taking notes. For the next media hit, Crockett knew exactly who she was dealing with. "You warned me to tread carefully," she had told Bondi earlier. "Here's a warning back. The path between national security and political revenge is paved with broken careers. And it only goes one way." Bondi had nothing to say to that. She didn't need to. Her strategy was survival. But Elon Musk. He wasn't built for silence. He leaned back in his chair like it was a throne made of algorithms, sunglasses still on indoors, arms crossed like the rules of decorum didn't apply in his dimension. A man who once launched rockets now hovered above the law, with federal agents as his personal concierge service. He was here as a witness, but really he was the ghostwriter of the disinformation era, and Jasmine Crockett called it out. "I don't like Elon Musk," she said flatly. "I don't like what he stands for. I don't like that he fires entire departments and calls it innovation. I don't like that federal law enforcement treats him like a 4-star general, while the rest of us can't get a squad car to show up when our offices receive death threats." Musk didn't flinch, but the tension on his jaw told another story. She leaned in. "You don't get to build a system, profit from it, and then pretend you're just the janitor when it starts leaking hate like a broken pipe." Still no response, just posture, just silence. Then came the third pillar of the machine, Kash Patel. He wore the title of FBI director, but the truth, he had never carried a badge, never worked a field case, never passed through Quantico. His only credential was loyalty. Jasmine didn't hold back. "You're running the Federal Bureau of Investigation?" she said slowly, deliberately. "But you've never been trained in federal law enforcement. So, let me ask you, Mr. Patel, where did you learn how to investigate at Mar-a-Lago, or in the comments section of Truth Social?" The room cracked barely. A staffer coughed to hide a chuckle. A camera flash froze a smirk from the press gallery. Patel gripped his pen tighter like he wanted it to turn into a gavel. He didn't answer. Because there was no answer that could defend the truth she'd just laid bare. This wasn't an investigation anymore. It was a revelation. One by one, Crockett tore the veil off every player in Trump's second act of governance. The roles they played, the laws they bent, the threats they ignored, and the ones they quietly orchestrated. It all came back to one thing: power. Not the kind you earn, the kind you purchase. The kind that rewards loyalty over logic, wealth over work, image over integrity. Crockett didn't need to shout. She didn't need to twist words. She had something stronger: facts. One of those facts, a physical letter. A real threat sent to a sitting member of Congress. She held it up for the chamber to see. Black ink, white paper, hate printed in Helvetica. That's not partisanship. That's policy, she said, ice in her voice. Because when this administration brands dissent as terrorism, it doesn't just chill speech, it freezes democracy. Trump sat 3 chairs away, still not speaking, but his knuckles were white against the armrests now. It was working. She was landing the blows where it hurt, not in his ego, in his illusion of control. Because every time she said this, administration, what she really meant was you. You appointed them. You silenced agents. You replaced competence with compliance. You turned the Department of Justice into a Department of Just Us, just you, your loyalists, and your donors, and the American people. They got the bill. But Crockett wasn't finished, because buried beneath the showmanship, beneath the scandal, beneath the smirks and scripts and subpoenas, was a simple, terrifying truth. We are no longer arguing left versus right. We are arguing right versus wrong. And that's a fight Trump's team wasn't built to win. They were built to deny, distract, discredit, delay. But now their tactics were stale. Their magic was wearing off. The country was waking up, and Jasmine Crockett was the alarm. And the clock, it was ticking. Tick for the subpoenas. Tick for the hearings. Tick for a democracy that had stared too long into the abyss and was now clawing its way back toward the light. Trump might have entered that room expecting a headline. What he got was an obituary for his illusion of invincibility. Anne Crockett, she just flipped the page and kept going. Because Jasmine Crockett knew something that too many others had forgotten. This wasn't just about holding Trump accountable. It was about putting the system itself on trial. And in that room under the glare of cameras in front of a gallery packed with press staffers and ghosts of political promises long broken, she wasn't just a congresswoman. She was prosecutor, witness, and jury. The illusion had cracked. Now came the collapse. Let's talk about facts, she said as calmly as someone reading a weather report, except the storm she forecast was political and biblical. Fact. Even before he was confirmed, Mr. Patel here was ordering FBI officials to fire agents not because they were corrupt, not because they were incompetent, but because they dared investigate Donald J. Trump. Cameras clicked. Patel shifted. A bead of sweat ran along his hairline. Crockett didn't let up. Fact, Mr. Patel failed to disclose his financial connections to the Qatari government. A government that, according to the Mazars report, funneled nearly $500,000 directly into Trump's personal accounts. No denials, no rebuttals, just silence that grew heavier with every syllable. And here's another fact. For the record, the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force disbanded. The Department of Justice's enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act quietly scaled back. That's not reform, that's surrender. The word echoed, surrender. Not to diplomacy, not to bipartisanship, but to the cult of one man, Trump. Still slumped in his chair, still arms folded, still holding tight to whatever semblance of dignity hadn't already been peeled away like gold leaf wallpaper in a foreclosed casino. Crockett didn't look at him. She didn't need to. He was no longer the star of the show. She had demoted him from Kingmaker to Exhibit A. And let me be clear, she said, voice sharpening, Mr. Patel has never, not for a single day, been an FBI agent, never graduated Quantico, never wore the badge, but today he holds the title of Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A pause, one heartbeat long. Then she slid a document across the table, its corners crisp, its contents damning. This is the lease agreement for the home Mr. Patel currently lives in, she said. The property is owned by a GOP megadonor. So, let me ask the question the American people are already screaming. If our law enforcement leaders are living in mansions funded by political allies who exactly are they protecting? Across the aisle, murmurs. Someone shuffled papers just to make noise. A Republican staffer whispered into a phone and slipped out the back. Patel tried to speak. These are baseless, no Crockett cut in fast and final. These are congressional records. She picked up the Mazars report, flipped to a page, and held it aloft. Your name appears 13 times. Would you like me to read each one? His mouth opened, but no sound followed. Trump looked over whether to rescue or reprimand was unclear, but Crockett didn't need either. She turned her attention back to the room, to the dais, to the people watching at home who didn't care about party lines anymore. They cared about whether anyone still stood for the law. She inhaled, steady, controlled, deadly. Because if the only law that's enforced is the one that protects the powerful, then we're not a republic, we're a reality show, with subpoenas. The room stilled. Even the fluorescent buzz above seemed to hush itself. Somewhere, a camera light blinked red. Live. She was still live. Good. Mr. Chairman, she said, turning to face the bench, thank you for the space today. But let me close with something real. That caught attention. Something real. The kind of words that don't come from policy memos. The kind that come from the gut. She paused. Just long enough for every eye, every lens, every skeptical smirk to lock in. When I applied to be a public defender, I had zero experience in criminal defense. A few heads tilted. Trump glanced over confused. What was this vulnerability? She smiled, the kind of smile that carried a scalpel behind the lips. I walked into that interview and told my future boss, Charlie, you should hire me. He looked at me like I was nuts. He asked me why. She let the tension build. Everyone was listening now, and I told him, because I'm black. There it was. A jolt of air sucked from the room. Gasps, no, too political. But the oxygen shifted. I told him that when I walk into those courtrooms, I bring something my white colleagues don't, a connection, an understanding, the weight of knowing what it means to be judged the second you walk through the door. Now Trump understood. But it was too late. Charlie gave me that job, and I fought tooth and nail for every client, not just the ones who looked like me, but every single one who walked through that courtroom, without power, without protection, without privilege. Her voice lowered, not from fear, but force. So no, Mr. Trump, this is not a therapy session. This is a civic lesson. She turned back to him, and this time she looked him dead in the eye. And if you still don't get it, I'll teach you the Constitution, line by line. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Because at that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just talking to Trump. She was talking to every American who ever felt like the law was a club used against them, not a shield held for them. The trap Trump thought he set, it became the stage of his undoing. Anne Crockett. She wasn't auditioning for the next headline. She was the headline. And the world was watching. Not just through the polished lenses of cable news cameras or the shaky live streams of citizen journalists, but through the eyes of a public that had finally stopped scrolling long enough to listen. Because in that chamber, something had shifted, something rare. A truth had been spoken not for applause, not for branding, but because it needed to be said. And Jasmine Crockett, standing with nothing but a folder and an ironclad spine, had said it without flinching. But the reckoning wasn't over. No, this wasn't just about Donald Trump anymore. This was about the structure that protected him, enabled him, muted the alarms while it built him a throne. And now, Crockett turned her fire on the pillars of that protection one by one. Her next target, Elon Musk. Still slouched in his chair, arms crossed, sunglasses defiantly perched on the bridge of his nose like he was at a SpaceX launch, not a congressional hearing. He wasn't smirking anymore, just watching, calculating. Crockett stared at him for a moment, letting the tension breathe. Then, let me just say this on the record for what feels like the 50,000th time, because apparently when you have billions, you also have amnesia. I don't like Elon Musk. You could feel the air pull taut again. I don't like what he represents. I don't like that he walks into rooms, fires entire departments, and calls it innovation. I don't like that somehow this man has the full force of federal law enforcement acting like they're guarding a military installation, when all he runs is a tech company that sells overpriced cars and monetizes outrage. Musk shifted finally, the arms folded tighter, the sunglasses came off. Not dramatically, just slowly, as if he knew he couldn't hide behind tinted lenses anymore. You operate above the law. Crockett continued, because you have more money than God and less accountability than a parking meter. That line hit hard. The gallery reacted. Even a few Republican aides stopped typing. She leaned in slow and deliberate, as if handing him a mirror he had no choice but to look into. And yes, I said it on my birthday, she added with a smile that could carve stone. It made me happy to see peaceful protests around the world. Because the world is finally realizing you're not a genius, Mr. Musk. You're a problem. Now he sat up, jaw tight, microphone hot. Look, he said, tone flat defensive. I don't control what everyone does. I created a platform. What people do with it, that's not always on me. But Crockett was ready. No, you don't get to hide behind your terms of service like a priest behind confession. You built the platform. You profited from the hate. And when that platform collapses under the weight of racism, disinformation, and stochastic terror, you act like you just installed the Wi-Fi. She paused, letting it land. then almost surgical. If I tweet against you, I get shadow banned. But if a white nationalist tweets hate speech, you call it free speech. Musk opened his mouth, but she kept going. You want to be the champion of free expression? Then explain why dissent gets silenced and hate gets verified. He blinked, lips parted, but no sound, because the answer didn't fit in a tweet, and there were no PR filters in this room. You don't tell people what to think, Mr. Musk Crockett continued, but you built the system that tells them who to fear, and now that system houses hate like it's a tenant with lifetime rent control. She turned away from him, not out of retreat but dismissal, the kind of turn that says, "We're done here." Then came Kash Patel. He tried to look unreadable, neutral, but Crockett could smell bluff from a mile away. And Patel. He was made of it. Let me say this for the record. She began lifting another document from her folder. There are sitting members of Congress right now receiving threats traced back to rhetoric aired by this new DOJ. She held up a printed letter. Stark, cold, real. This was sent to my colleague. A death threat. Typed, sealed, delivered because someone decided criticizing Elon Musk or Donald Trump is now an act of domestic terrorism. She turned to Patel. You, Mr. Patel, are supposed to run the FBI, but your agents don't investigate anymore. They intimidate. Not based on crime, but based on who disagrees with the guy you've pledged loyalty to. Patel sat straighter, finally speaking up. That's not true. Crockett cut in voice like razors. Tell me, sir, have you ever worn a badge? Been through training, investigated a case without political instruction? He tried again. I was appointed through loyalty, not qualification. She slammed the folder down. You quashed subpoenas. You oversaw the dismissal of agents investigating Trump. And now your name appears in the Mazars report right next to a trail of foreign money bleeding into Trump's hotels. The room was dead quiet. You run the FBI part-time, from Las Vegas, living in a house owned by a Republican donor. She turned slowly, addressing the room. What would Republicans have done if James Comey was running the bureau from New York while crashing at George Soros's guest house? No answer, just stunned silence. Because they all knew. And then, with a final breath, she looked at Patel and said, We don't need an FBI run by a loyalist. We need it run by the law. And that law, Mr. Patel, you have broken. Trump shifted again, subtle, uncomfortable. For once his body betrayed him. Because Crockett wasn't just pulling threads. She was unraveling the entire tapestry. And with every word, every citation, every fact that sliced deeper than any partisan soundbite, she was proving a point far more dangerous than any attack ad. The problem wasn't just Trump, it was the system that chose to kneel. And Jasmine Crockett. She was standing so the rest of us wouldn't have to crawl. And in that moment, beneath the cold LED lights of a hearing room, rigged for theater, but repurposed for truth, it became clear she wasn't just dismantling a regime. She was indicting a culture that rewards loyalty over law. A culture where billionaires get bodyguards and badges, and justice becomes a brand sold to the highest bidder. A culture where the line between prosecution and persecution is drawn not in ink, but in ideology. But Crockett wasn't just there to point fingers. She came to flip the mirror. And with it, she posed the only question that mattered. Who does the law serve now? Not just in theory, in practice. Because if it only shows up for some of us, if the law responds faster to campaign donations than to death threats, then what we're defending isn't a republic, it's a reality show with subpoenas. And the next episode, it's already being written in back rooms and burner phones. So, Crockett did what no one else in that room had the courage to do. She reached into the stack of documents beside her, pulled out the official threat letter sent to her colleague, one of many she noted sent in the weeks following Bondi's Fox News smear campaign, and held it up. This, she said coldly, is what happens when justice is reduced to vengeance wrapped in talking points. When law enforcement becomes less about evidence and more about echo chambers. Her tone didn't waver, but her words cut like open flame. This isn't about whether I like Elon Musk. It's about the fact that my criticism of a private citizen led to federal protection for his company and federal intimidation for mine. She turned again, gaze sweeping the room. Let me say it plainly: when law enforcement becomes a tool of political protection, instead of public protection, we've crossed the line from democracy to dictatorship. No one moved, not Bondi still scribbling with lawyerly detachment, not Patel, who by now looked like a man caught in a chess match where every square had already been compromised. Not even Trump, whose silence had started to mutate from tactical to tragic. He was losing the room, not in noise, but in meaning, in presence. And then came the moment that reset the atmosphere. Jasmine Crockett turned fully toward the chair, and spoke with the composure of someone who'd already made peace with the fallout. "Madam Chair, I yield the floor, but let the record show the threats came first. What you're hearing now is the answer." That line didn't just hang, it burned. And as the chair nodded, recognizing her once again, Crockett returned to the mic, eyes calm, voice like hammered glass. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's get real. 3 words. 1 reset." Suddenly the rhythm changed. No more formal citations. No more courtroom pacing. What came next was Crockett the citizen, not Crockett the congresswoman. Newsflash for anyone still clinging to their mega calendars: Joe Biden is not the president anymore. You could feel the tension snap, some of it with shock, some with uncomfortable relief. So, unless you're here to regulate delusion, let's move on. Murmurs in the room. One cough that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. We are not in 2020. We are not rewatching season 1 of Stop the Steal. This is Congress. Then, with just the faintest smirk and spoiler alert, our job is to make laws, not rewrite fan fiction. Gasps this time. Audible, not performative, real. Trump stirred, leaned forward, lips curled like a cat spotting a loose mouse. "Funny," he said low and gravelly. "The folks preaching rule of law sure treat it like a TikTok trend, hot 1 minute, gone the next." But Crockett didn't flinch. She licked her thumb, flipped another page. "And yet, here you are," she replied, eyes still on her notes, still trying to executive produce democracy like it's another bankrupt casino. Trump laughed, short, smug. "You're not a legislator, Jasmine," he sneered. "You're an instigator, a soundbite in heels." Crockett didn't blink. She set her papers down, slowly, deliberately. "I may be an instigator," she said coolly, "but at least I didn't send a mob in Gucci belts to storm the Capitol while I watched from a golf cart." That line nuclear. The room shifted like tectonic plates. Trump sat back, jaw tense, shoulders square, but voice suddenly absent. Still, she wasn't done. "What's glue," she added, "is your grip on reality. What's dead is accountability. And guess who helped bury it under a golden toilet in Florida?" Even the chair paused, gavel in hand, but didn't strike it. Because this wasn't chaos. This was clarity. And for once, Congress had no choice but to listen. "You call me a soundbite," she continued, "but you built your entire career on all caps lies and golf course indictments. I deal in facts, you deal in merch." Then she drove it home. "You're not a president, you're a brand. And that brand, it's gone clearance." The gavel finally dropped, but not to interrupt, to underline. And Jasmine Crockett. She didn't stand back. She straightened just enough to deliver the final shot of the round. "You don't scare me, Mr. Trump. You don't silence me. And you sure as hell don't own this room." 1 beat, 1 breath. Then, "This isn't Trump Tower. This is the United States Congress. And in this chamber, the only name engraved in power is we, the people." Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't about powerlessness. It was about impact. The kind of silence that lingers when truth lands too hard to clap for. And Jasmine Crockett. She was just getting started, because truth doesn't end when the mic goes cold. It travels. It reverberates. It echoes through chambers, through headlines, through every living room and smartphone screen that caught Jasmine Crockett's words and didn't just hear them, felt them. And while the final syllables of "we the people" still buzzed in the atmosphere like struck tuning forks, the real storm had already started. Not inside Congress, but outside it. Within minutes, clips of Crockett's testimony exploded across social media. The line, "You're not a president, you're a brand. And that brand, it's gone clearance," hit TikTok like a lightning bolt. Subtitles, remixes, duets. It wasn't just going viral, it was going vital. X was an inferno. Hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. Crockett unleashed. Warm's Gucci mob. The soundbite in heels. That's with the people. Each one a flag planted in the battlefield of public opinion, declaring, "We heard her, we believe her, and this time, we're not letting it go." On YouTube, reaction videos flooded in from progressives, independents, and even a few center-right commentators whose expressions shifted from smug skepticism to slack-jawed awe. She dismantled them, one political analyst said, still visibly stunned. That wasn't a hearing. That was a democratic intervention. And in the streets, something even more surprising happened. Not marches, not riots, not chants of fury. Just people, ordinary citizens, standing quietly in front of courthouses in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Sacramento, holding cardboard signs in silence. Nothing elaborate, just handwritten truths in black marker. No one is above the law. We stand with the truth. No hashtags, no logos, just resolve. Meanwhile, the political fallout spread fast and silent like gas in a sealed room. Pam Bondi abruptly canceled all press appearances for the week, citing health-related fatigue. But The Hill called it what it was: strategic retreat, a comms crash, a lawyer without a script. Kash Patel was quietly placed on administrative leave. No press release, no defense. Just a discreet edit on the DOJ's internal directory. His title replaced with acting interim oversight pending review. The machine was buckling. And Trump. Had he fired off 5 Truth Social posts in 30 minutes, all caps, all rage, all noise, but for the first time in over a year, not a single one of them made it to Fox News' Chiron. That was the bigger headline. Not what he said, but what didn't get echoed, because even propaganda machines know when a narrative is hemorrhaging too hard to spin. Back inside the Capitol, Crockett didn't call a press conference. She didn't hold a victory rally. She didn't walk into MSNBC for a primetime interview. No. She gathered her papers, buttoned her blazer, and walked out of that hearing room the same way she walked in, sharp, steady, and unshaken. One lone freelance camera caught her on the marble steps outside. No entourage, no fuss. Just a woman walking into the afternoon sun as if she had just filed paperwork, not detonated a political narrative. Behind her, the massive doors of Congress began to close. In front of her, a wall of reporters. She didn't wave. She didn't smile for the flash, just a nod. Quiet. Composed. That was enough. Because justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers just loud enough for a nation to hear it. And while Trump's camp scrambled to clean up the mess, sending out surrogate statements, spinning, talking points, hinting at another run, none of it landed. Not like Crockett's words had. Because hers weren't just facts, they were convictions. And America had been starved of those for far too long. Even in conservative media circles, fractures appeared. A Fox News panel split live on air over whether Patel was a patriot or a puppet. A right-leaning legal podcast admitted, albeit reluctantly, that Crockett's evidence about the Qatari money trail raised legitimate ethical red flags. In the days that followed, editorials flowed in from every coast. The Washington Post, the Firebrand. We needed. The Guardian Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. Yes, the Atlantic post-Trump politics finally found its line in the sand. But Crockett didn't posture, didn't gloat. When asked for comment during a brief interview at a community legal clinic in Dallas, she said simply, "It's not about going viral, it's about going truthful. If that scares people, maybe they were never meant to lead." And the merch. Oh yes, there was merch. T-shirts, coffee mugs, stickers. Some read, "I deal in facts, you deal in merch." This isn't Trump Tower. Clearance brand politics ends here. But the one that outsold them, all 4 words. White text, black background, we, the people. That in the end became the real rally cry. Not because it was catchy, but because for too long, those words had become hollow, muttered in oaths, printed on banners, stripped of their meaning by men who saw them as a branding tool rather than a binding promise. Crockett changed that. She reminded the country that those words still have teeth, that they can still bite back. And as for Trump, his legal team filed 3 motions in the following week, all variations of the same desperate defense mischaracterization, political bias, irrelevance. But no motion can undo the moment when truth lands in front of millions and no one, not even the loudest man in American politics, can shout it down. So, yes, Jasmine Crockett stood alone that day, but she didn't leave alone. She left with the truth. And this time, it had a microphone, a camera, and a nation ready to listen. Because that hearing wasn't just about Trump. It was about us, about whether we still believe the law applies to all, about whether we still know the difference between power and justice, and about whether one woman armed with nothing but facts and fearlessness could walk into a room built to silence her and make it echo instead. She didn't win because she was the loudest. She won because she refused to look away. And neither will we.